Welcome back to VADA Live. I'm your host, Dan Carrigan. Well, for this segment, we're talking about Virginia's election results and what they mean for businesses and dealers. To recap, what an election night. They delivered a historic Democratic sweep with Abigail Spanberger elected as Virginia's 75th governor, and that's the first female chief executive, alongside Lieutenant Governor-elect Ghazala Hashmi and Attorney General-elect Jay Jones. In the House of Delegates, a lot to report there. Democrats expanded their majority by 13 seats. So, for Virginia's business community, including franchise auto dealers, this year's election results signal a new political landscape really in Richmond and across the Commonwealth heading into the 2026 general election. So, joining me to discuss all this and more, really two gentlemen that don't need introductions if you follow Virginia politics, are Tripp Perrin, president of Lindl Government Affairs, and Greg Habeeb, president of Gentry Locke Consulting. Quick note, both of these guests are members of the VADA lobbying team. Tripp and Greg, welcome to VADA Live.
Morning.
Thank you. Morning. Glad to be here.
Appreciate you both taking time. So I know we have a ton of questions to get through, but I want to start and just ask perhaps just a personal question. Election night, do you have any routines, anything you try to do? What does election night mean for you? I know it could be a lot of things depending on the year, but any traditions that you have?
Greg, go first. How about that?
Well, I mean, obviously, some people may or may not know, I was in the House of Delegates for 8 or 10 years. So election night used to be very personal for me. So the years when you're on the ballot, you treat it very differently. I actually don't like being in the large crowds on election night now. I don't like going to the big celebrations. So I literally tend to sit at home with some kind of sporting event on TV and Twitter in my hand, so that I can track the results. And I send a lot of text messages that night, and I talk to a lot of people, but I actually stay away from sort of the big crowds.
I think I'm in a similar posture. I went to dinner with my team this year. We had a great dinner, and then the most productive time is when you're actually at your computer hitting refresh on VPAP and figuring out who's doing what. And like Greg said, certainly having the text messages going of people who are in the field who at least are pretending to know what's happening versus being at the big cattle calls on election night.
Well, appreciate you sharing those insights. I come from the media side of things, so I understand that refresh process very, very well, especially that can go in sometimes, late into the evening. So this election, what are your takeaways, and really what do you think this means for doing business here in the Commonwealth of Virginia moving forward? And I'll let whoever wants to jump in.
Sure. I'll start, but Greg's the auto dealer expert here. I'm just here for the humor and color commentary. But I'll say, I certainly think the first thing, and well, it's sort of in jest, but is don't ever believe the polls. They trick us every year into thinking that they know we know what's going to happen, and you make the average of them. And I think if you look at the polls, nobody, I think certainly everybody had Abigail winning, but I think the amount by which she won, picking up 13 seats in the House, I don't think that was on truly anybody's bingo card. If they're being honest about it, and even just in the margins, even in most of those races, none of them were terribly close. Or maybe a couple of them, but they weren't very close. And so I think that the polls certainly did not tell the story, and I don't know how they're going to fix that. So that's the big thing. I would also say, Virginia is clearly a blue state. It's been headed that way for many years. I think the Republicans and Governor Glenn Youngkin kind of caught lightning in a bottle in 2021 for a host of different reasons. But if you look out at election night and the results, I think every locality trended more Democratic this year than they did in 2021. And the turnout in the Republican localities where Glenn Youngkin had won big were all down. And so, again, I think we are definitely a bluer and bluer state than we ever have been.
Yeah, I mean, everything Tripp said there is 100% right. A couple of sort of truisms I think about Virginia politics that people forget. It's just a reality that Virginia reacts to what's happening in Washington. And with the exception of 2013, when Governor McAuliffe won as a result of a government shutdown that was happening, we always elect the party not in power. Now, that doesn't mean it's always going to happen, But what it means is the party not in power in D.C. always overperforms in Virginia. So it goes from Tim Kaine to Bob McDonnell. It goes to Glenn Youngkin, Ralph Northam. All those elections were really a reaction to what was happening in D.C. So my first comment would be it shouldn't surprise anybody that the environment was inherently very favorable to the Democrats. That shouldn't surprise anybody. That's truism number one. My entire life, that's been the case. Number two, undecided voters in Virginia tend to break largely in one direction. And that may be the case in lots of states. I can't speak to lots of states, but I think the reason polls tend to miss is because they don't capture that late 5% move that almost always goes one way. And so if you take this year's polls and you simply move 80% of the undecideds in the late polls to the Democratic side, it explains the entire change from what people expected. I mean, my internal prediction with my team was that Spanberger would win by about 10. I missed by about 5 points. The Democrats would pick up 60 seats. I missed by 4 seats. But if you apply that late breaking move, it tends to explain it every year. And it did it with Youngkin. It did it with McAuliffe before. Obviously, I agree with Tripp. I think we're a blue state. And so I don't think that forevermore you can predict just because a Democrat might be in the White House that a Republican will win. But I think that explains a lot of what we saw.
And I think the only reason that Greg may have missed his projections was you got to layer also in there the 330,000 federal workers that are in Virginia. You've got one party in power up there, and I think the Republicans up in D.C. were trying to blame the shutdown for the Democrats. That did not happen, and so you look in those localities where you got a heavy concentration of federal workers. I mean, it was a trouncing by the Democrats. So I think all of that combined, got us to where we are.
With all that said, what do you really think this moment says about Virginia right now?
I think it's what Tripp said. We have been trending. I think we are a blue state. That doesn't mean blue states can't elect Republicans every now and again, but Virginia is a blue state. Unless there's some significant workforce or demographic shift, I think that's where we are for the time being. We are very reactive now at the state level to what happens in D.C. In my market, every campaign commercial I saw was Trump is bad and Republicans want to take away your abortion rights. Those are sort of the driving issues. There was no education, transportation, tax policy. What are we going to do about energy in Virginia? None of the things that are sort of a lot of the things that are more state level issues. And I think that's what voters react to. And we have a largely federalized electorate now.
Yeah, I mean, you look at suburban, the numbers among suburban women, and I mean, it wasn't even close. And the Republicans are going to have to figure out the abortion issue if they're ever going to compete in major elections. In my opinion, here in Virginia, and I'd say with 2 teenage girls, I'd say it's also it was the election for women. I mean, obviously at the top of the ticket, but I think 10 out of the 13 new seats are women, and 5 of those are African Americans. So certainly, the power to the women for this election, and that's been happening in the last several elections as well.
And Tripp, to that end too, just from your perspectives, any just early signs you're seeing from Governor-elect Spanberger's transition and the team forming around her?
Sure. I think, Greg, I imagine you'll agree with this. I am very heartened by Spanberger's team generally. I would say they are the most serious-minded that I've ever seen sort of come into this space, through many, many governors. Policy-minded. They were even up at the General Assembly session in 2025, getting to know people, getting to know the issues, to understand Virginia, because they knew, they were coming from the federal government, and they may not have known it as well. And so I think they've been great to work with. I think they've named an excellent transition team, which is obviously very important as she starts to figure out how to govern. So I think all signs thus far are very, very positive.
Yeah, I agree with all that. A couple additional comments. I mean, it's exciting. One of the members of the VADA lobbying team, Carlos Hopkins, is on the governor's transition team. So we're excited that we have sort of voices in the room. It's pretty exciting for auto dealers. I think if you're going to raise any flag, it's the sort of the DC nature of some of her key staffers. Sometimes that doesn't translate as quickly. And as you know, with a one-term governor, you've got 4 years, you've got essentially one full budget cycle that you're in charge of. You got to hit the ground running. And so if there's anything to flag, it's making sure that sort of the DC folks transition quickly. Now, the good thing is, as Tripp said, these people have invested in Richmond. Some of our key staff they live in the market, or they have family members in the market, or their transition teams in the market. There's nobody in the transition teams that you look at and you go, oh no, that's the bomb that they just dropped in to the market. It's going to be a problem for us. A lot of people who get it, a lot of just professional folks who want to do a good job. So yeah, I mean, I'm encouraged as Tripp is.
Would love to get your reactions just from the business community side of things. Are you hearing anything from other industries about the election results, including automotive side of as well?
Yeah, I mean, Tripp and I both have clients across a broad spectrum of both trade associations and individual corporate clients. I think the reality is, while the margins may have surprised people, the results were largely inevitable. And so everybody knew Democrats were going to control the House. Everybody knew Spanberger was going to be governor. Everybody knew Hashmi was going to be lieutenant governor. There was obviously some uncertainty around the LG race for the last 6 weeks or so. But I think people had really built both their involvement in the campaigns and their plans for next year around an environment that looks largely like this. And I think a lot of people are fairly comfortable with Spanberger and her team at the top of the ticket, and with Don Scott as the speaker over in the House. There are folks who, for lack of a better term, sort of get it. And while they have an agenda, they have ideologies, they have a base that's going to want them to advance certain things, they genuinely have Virginia's best interests at heart. And so I think people are optimistic.
I echo that entirely. I think, there are obviously fringe groups that are out there saying the roll is going to, come to an end. And there's, anytime you've got a trifecta on it for either party, you get a little worried that there's not that balance that is out there. But, I think, certainly, Governor-elect Spanberger, while she was in office and while she was in Congress, was a moderate. I think she was measured. I think she was not afraid to talk, to certainly say what she thought to power, including Nancy Pelosi. And I think Don Scott came out Wednesday morning in his press conference and was very clear he is hoping for moderation. It's certainly going to be a different agenda, but I think moderation and taking some baby steps and not going too far one way or the other. Which is the way he governed, which way he was speaker in his first term as well. So I agree with Greg.
For auto dealers in particular, is there anything that should be top of mind right now for them related to the election results across the board?
I'll start with Greg there, because Greg knows more than I do.
Well, I mean, I think at a Franchise Act level, I think we're in good shape. I think we continue to have the right people in key positions who understand the importance of the franchise model and understand the role that we play in communities. So I think that's a good thing. If there's anything to keep an eye on, it's sort of in what we broadly call the consumer protection space. I think we have an attorney general now who will probably be a little more interested in using that office to advance consumer protection issues. And I don't flag those as bad. They're just a thing to be aware of. There are some states where that has become a big issue for auto dealers. There's a lot of sort of in the weeds policy issues, like how you advertise, what kind of fees you can charge, how you collect and use data. A lot of those are issues that dealers are going to have to work with. But the reality is the good players in the market can thrive in that environment. And so I don't think there's anything here where you say, well, this is a major sea change and auto dealers need to be really concerned. So again, I'm very cautiously optimistic that we're in a good place.
Yeah, I agree with all that, and just to put a finer point on one of the points, and I think you might get to this here in a little bit, but I think keep doing what you're doing, right? I mean, Don and the team at the VADA has built a truly a political machine, if you will, that is able to go out and legislators and policymakers, they want to see people in the community. They want to see people hiring people. They want to see people thriving, and there's no better example of that than auto dealers. And so continuing to be politically engaged and getting members of the House and the Senate and getting Abigail and her team down when you can, and obviously participating politically in the money process is important. And so I'd just say continue that model, because that's that's what has won in the past, and there's no reason to believe that's going to change.
Tripp, to that point too, Don Hall does remind us often this relationships really, really matter. And with this new leadership, let's dive in a little bit more on that. How can those relationships really matter in getting things done? Little insider information. Where's that play a role when we talk about this election cycle and a new, just really a lot of folks coming into the process now?
I mean, I think anytime you've got a lot of new folks, I think, the power is concentrated a little bit more than it may have been otherwise with the senior leadership. Greg served in the House, so I'll be interested in his comments on that. But I think, anytime you've got a lot of new people, you had 53 new legislators 2 years ago, and that included the Senate, but you had a lot of new House members. You got 13, or actually 17 new ones now if you include the Republicans. So, they don't, they don't know much. And so I think, again, the power resides with the chairs of the committees and the speaker and leadership in the Senate as well. And so, I think it's those deep relationships for folks that have been around a long time, the chairmen, chairwomen, and leadership. I think that's where the focus has been and continues to be. If you look at the Transportation Committee in the House, where most of the auto dealer work is done, I think right now you only lost one seat, one Republican seat. One of the practical effects of all this is that the seats were 12-10 on the committees. They're now going to be 15-7, so the Democrats will pick up 3 seats. So at the bare minimum, they'll have to kick off 2 Republicans on the Transportation Committee. But I think as far as committees that got sort of hit with a lot of losses, Transportation was the least of it, and that'll change up some too. But anyway.
Yeah, one of the things I always said when I was in the General Assembly is if the first time I meet you is when you come to ask me for something, then you haven't done your job. And the auto dealers are masters at building relationships before they need to make an ask. And that's not just building relationships, is not just campaign money. It's genuinely building relationships. And I think Don and the team were very strategic this year, both with the new administration and with some key new candidates in the House, of actually building early relationships. And so as we head into January, Don and the team are going to be able to walk into the room and make asks when necessary. And that's not going to be the first time that legislator's ever met them. And that's the credibility you develop with relationships.
Greg, any additional perspective on that, on those practical implications in having 13 new Dems in the House?
Well, I mean, the learning curve of a new legislator is extraordinary. I mean, it takes terms plural before you really know what you're doing, before you even know what some of the terms mean. And so, again, one of the practical results is because you've built credibility with these people early, they'll actually rely on you for advice, for understanding, for knowing how the system works. And so it's not just, you're not playing defense. You're literally able to have people come to you and say, hey, I'm new here. Tell me how this works. Hey, I need to know about the Franchise Act. Tell me about it now, because we already talked about it once on the campaign trail. And so I think the practical reality is, whereas a lot of trade associations, a lot of industries will be playing catch up with those folks, we now get to move to the next phase of those relationships.
100%.
One race I wanted to get into, and it was really an election night highlight, Attorney General-elect Jay Jones winning. By background, bringing that legislative as well as transportation experience to the role. From both your perspectives, how might that background influence how his office really engages with industries like the automotive space?
I mean, it's obviously always helpful to have legislative experience when you come into the roles like that, because I think you understand how this place operates. I mean, you understand where the levers of power are and who needs to be in a room, frankly, when making a decision. That's a big piece of all of this, and I think Attorney General-elect Jones knows that. He knows the players. He knows all of us. So if there's an auto dealer issue, he's going to pick up the phone and call Don for sure, but certainly be able to pick up the phone and call any member of the lobbying team. And so I think it's enormously helpful, and certainly obviously that he was on transportation and understands these issues, including the franchise law. I think is a huge deal.
Yeah, and I'll flag, just because I flagged earlier, in addition to being on Abigail Spanberger's transition team, VADA has a member of Jay Jones's transition team as well. So again, we're well placed there with those relationships. Here's what I'm interested in. When I got to the General Assembly in 2011, the AG's office was very, very active in the legislative process, very active, both offering policy opinions, legal opinions, and constitutional opinions. That changed some the last couple of attorneys general. In fact, Attorney General Herring's office told me one time, I asked them why they weren't coming to the courts committee to testify. And they said, it's not our job to participate in the legislative process. That surprised me. So, and he was a former legislator. So every every attorney general has their own approach. I'll be curious to see how active that office is legislatively. We know they'll be active legally on the enforcement side, again, especially on Consumer Protection Act issues. But I'll be curious to see how active they are legislatively. And I hope they are active, because I think that office is an important voice and an important asset to legislators in the process. I'm just not sure we know yet what the role they'll play will be.
Such a great point. I mean, there's been depending upon the issue, it can be frustrating when there's a bill that particularly impacts the Attorney General's office and they won't weigh in, and that has definitely happened more and more frequently over the last couple of AGs.
And if you both will indulge me, I know it will not come as news to you both. At the time of recording of this segment, we're less than 70 days from the General Assembly session. Where do you see this session headed in both maybe the pace, the tone, and some of the issues that are near and dear to dealers' hearts? What's that looking like?
I'm going to let the former legislator answer first.
So it's a long session. And it's the weird session where you have a new budget introduced by the outgoing governor, and then you have the new governor taking it over. I think the budget issues are going to overweigh everything else, every policy issue, everything. It's going to come down to budget. We have these massive holes in the budget right now around Medicaid and other things. And so anything that costs money is going to have a problem. Anything that's going to generate money is going to be interesting. A lot of the nitty-gritty day-to-day policy stuff is going to get ignored, I think, at least by the public. I'm actually kind of encouraged. So a lot of people have said to me, well, the new partisan nature, it's going to be really, really nasty and ugly. I actually don't think that's the case. The ugliest partisanship is when it's 51-49 because everybody's fighting for control. When it's 64-36, Republicans are not trying to win back control next time. I served in a General Assembly that was 68-32. It was the least partisan of my time in the General Assembly because the Democrats at that time weren't focused on how are we going to win these big macro battles to win control. They were focused on the issues that matter to their districts. And so maybe I'm naive. Maybe I'll prove to be, stupid after session is over. But I actually think Democrats are so in charge that Republicans will look for places to work with them. And then they're going to all have to come together on these finance issues. The budget issues are so big. I do not believe this is going to be a big year where auto dealers are at risk of anything significant. There'll be some things maybe in the employment space we need to keep an eye on and on consumer protection. But I don't think this is like an existential threat risk year for auto dealers. But I think for the state, the budget issues are what are going to drive it.
Couldn't agree more on the budget issue. I mean, there's a $3 billion shortfall in Medicaid. I mean, the good news, I think, for Virginia in terms of how we are perceived by the rest of the world, we do have a constitutionally mandated balanced budget, and I think that's important. But that is going to certainly, that is going to require them taking a lot of time figuring out spending and where that comes from, and obviously, as Greg said, revenue as well. I think the one area to watch that may not have a direct impact on auto dealers in the short term anyway, but I think is to watch big labor. Big labor was very active in these elections, obviously supporting Democrats to see where collective bargaining goes and issues like that. I think that is something that to keep an eye on, and I think there will be some movement to help out the interest of big labor.
So we started this segment in the business space, so let's perhaps end there as well. You think about Virginia's national reputation as a good place to do business. Any factors that may determine that reputation, maybe strengths or changes under these election results, and specifically the new administration that's coming in?
I'd say just what Greg said, frankly, there. I mean, I think you cannot overstate the importance of the budget. And I think if we get a budget done on time or close to on time, we don't have to go into extra innings to do that. Where they're able to keep the investments in infrastructure, workforce, those sorts of things, and that there's not anything terribly negative on the labor front that they decide to do. That I think we will continue to be in good stead in terms of who's looking at Virginia and who's looking at coming to Virginia. One of our biggest assets, Virginia Economic Development Partnership, is one that is well regarded, I think, around the country. So I think we should be in good shape. But again, I think it's a lot of it is are we able to get our work done? Are we able to get it done on time? And what does that budget look like?
Yeah, I think the one thing I'd add to that, because all that's right. If you look at sort of the rankings where Virginia's ranked really high, the one place we tend to struggle is cost of doing business. There's cost of living, cost of workforce, energy prices, transportation costs, everything built into that. We have a real energy issue coming to the forefront with the spike in load demand through data centers and other high users. We're going to see more of that as industry develops. We've got a new pharmaceutical industry coming online in Virginia. They're going to be big energy consumers. There's a lot of costs associated with that. Auto dealers, like all businesses, care very much about cost of doing business. I think energy is moving up quickly on the cost of doing business side. And I do think that's a sort of an off the radar screen issue for auto dealers maybe to pay attention to, of where do we move on energy policy, transmission infrastructure build out, all those sorts of things, and how that's going to affect the cost of doing business. So just a thing to keep an eye on in the back.
With this election and just chatting with both of you, your background, your expertise, I'd love to ask, how does this rank? What's your headline for this year to share? I know that's tough on the spot. We do that sometimes as interviewers.
That was not in the list you sent, by the way.
I have no doubt that was going to be mentioned, Tripp, but I'd love to hear that. If anything, just what are people not mentioning? What's really that home run takeaway for you, just having followed races for years closely?
I don't think there's a home run takeaway that people aren't talking about. It's just the breadth and scope of the wipeout that happened politically. And as Tripp said, the races weren't even close. So, I mean, when you've got Bobby Orrock, a 36-year delegate, I believe, in a seat that was pretty much off everybody's radar screen, and he loses not by half a point, but by points plural, that's a real statement of what's going on. When districts like Spotsylvania, where Bobby lives, not only defeat him, but Spanberger carries that district, that's a different environment.
Yeah, agree with that. And again, I think obviously, I think power to the women, because I think again you've got it at the top of the ticket, you've got it across the board, and I think they spoke loudly, and whether they were speaking loudly against Trump or loudly against abortion or for abortion rights, they spoke loudly in the suburbs around the Commonwealth.
Well, appreciate you both sharing your time, perspectives, and even some questions we hadn't planned for. Thanks for a really great open discussion. You've been hearing from Tripp Perrin of Lindl Government Affairs and Greg Habeeb of Gentry Locke Consulting, both integral members of VADA's lobbying team, talking about recent election as well as what could be next and implications for the business community. We thank you for watching VADA Live, and I'm Dan Carrigan. We hope to see you next time.